Welcome to the Bear Sheep broadcast, a space for building stability, preserving legacy, and strengthening the communities we call home. I'm Khaliyah Heaven Barakhyahu, founder and president of Bear Sheet, a nonprofit organization based in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm honored you're joining us today. This show exists to have real conversations about homeownership, wealth building, family transitions, and the decisions that shape generations. Today's conversation is especially close to the heart. We're going to be talking about inheriting property, what it means, what to do, and hopefully how to protect your legacy. We have Hezekiah Baylor here with us today. Hezekiah, can you tell us anything about, have you had to go through anything dealing with inheriting property?
Yes, good afternoon, Khaliyah and audience. Recently in 2013, um, I we lost one of our my wife lost her mother, and we inherited her property. And at the time, there was a lot of details into um, what to do with the property, if the property had a mortgage, and or basically what process would take if we were to sell it. And with that, I was able to talk with Khaliyah, and Khaliyah was able to guide the whole process when we made our decision. So yes, I definitely had that experience. It was like anything, it's hard, especially when someone passes. But
Right.
at the same time, then you have to pick up those pieces. You got to keep going. So there are things that have to be done, especially when it comes to property that still requires property taxes. In some cases, like ours, it had a mortgage on it. So those are all the things that, we had to get a solution for because it was just a new thing that we had never had to deal with before. Yes.
And I appreciate you sharing that and really like jumping
Mm-hmm.
in with that story because
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned a lot of things that we're going to delve into just a little bit more. For
Yes.
many families, a home is one of the largest assets they'll ever own. And so when someone passes away, that home often becomes both a blessing and a responsibility, emotionally,
Yes.
financially, legally.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes even inheriting property can feel overwhelming to some people because there's paperwork
Mm-hmm.
involved. There's a lot of
Yes.
decisions. Sometimes there's
Mm-hmm.
grieving because you just lost someone. Then there's
Yes.
maintenance costs and there's questions that no one
Mm-hmm.
really ever talked about, so you don't know the answers to. I
Yes.
remember when your wife had lost your mother-in-law, and you all had to
Mm-hmm.
start going through the probate process. And one of the questions you asked
Mm-hmm.
me was, "What do we need to do?" And that was a
Right.
good
Right.
question because many people don't know what are those first steps.
Right.
What do they do? Because once you inherit
Mm-hmm.
property, it's not just okay. Now you have the property. Now you go and you go and make decisions. There's a process that you need to go through. And I don't know if
Yes.
you could think back to like some of those questions you
Mm-hmm.
had, like when you
Mm-hmm.
found out you all had inherited your mother-in-law's house. What were some of the questions that you had to navigate?
Yes. The first thing was when it came to the mortgage.
Right.
We
Mm-hmm.
found out that the home had a mortgage on it, which was a significant balance. And with that, working alongside the mortgage bank to be able to, take put the mortgage in our name or even keep it in my mother-in-law's name. So that was pretty much, I would say, the main question because like anything, the mortgage has to be paid.
Right.
We didn't want the house to go into default, so there was, a process where we were asking, what do we do? Where do we start? And I think it was simple. We go to the mortgage company, we bring the death certificate, and they were so great at giving, that grace to say, we know the mortgage is due, but we'll if we want to, delay it for 90 days and put that balance on the end of the mortgage, just to get, that time to really process what we're going to do next. So that was the first one, as far as taking care of that mortgage. The
Okay.
second one was, as far as how does it work when it comes to someone passing and the deed is, public or open. That deed had to be eventually transferred over to my wife, as a survivor.
Yes.
And, I think we came to you about that process too. Where do we go? How long do we have, to
Right.
get this stuff done? Because it's, pretty, it's almost like you didn't want to wait either. You know what I mean? A long
Yes.
time, because things happen. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
So you gave two very important things that people don't always think about. One, if
Mm-hmm.
you inherit a property, you inherit the mortgage. Not only do you inherit the mortgage, but you inherit the taxes, you inherit
Yes.
the insurance, you inherit the maintenance, you inherit the
Yes.
utilities, and if there's
Yes.
HOA dues or fees, you inherit those as well. And if there are any liens
Mm-hmm.
on the property, those come with the house
Yes.
too. So you're not just
Yes.
inheriting the property, you're inheriting those obligations. And many times when that happens, it can become a little more overwhelming when you don't know what to do. Now, let's back up just one moment and let's talk about when we say
Yes.
inheriting. So, inheriting a
Mm-hmm.
property means you're legally receiving the ownership of a home or land after someone passes away. And usually it's done through a will, a trust, or the probate process. A
Mm-hmm.
will usually specifies who receives the property. A trust can transfer ownership faster and privately. And then you have
Mm-hmm.
probate, or going through the probate process, where it's done by the court. Now, one of the things you said,
Right.
even before you got to transfer the property into your wife's name, you had to go to the court. You had to take the
Yes.
death certificate. You had to go to the circuit court in that area, and you had to let them know that a loved one had passed away and that you want to start the process. And in one of
Yes.
our next episodes, we'll talk a little bit more about the probate process, what to do if
Yes.
you don't have a will, because you still have to go through a legal process even if you don't have a
Mm-hmm.
will. And if you have a will, then you have to go through probate so that they can verify all the aspects of the will. So there still is a
Yes.
process. But once you go through that
Mm-hmm.
process and that executor is named, you now have to take care of a lot of the things that you said. You need to reach out to the mortgage company, and many mortgage
Mm-hmm.
companies they will work with you. You know, if you're trying
Mm-hmm.
to, they want to know what you want to do. If you're trying to keep the
Right.
house yourself, if you're going to refinance it into your name, if there's a mortgage, if you're going to sell it, they want to work with you. So if you're ever in
Yes.
that situation, you definitely want to reach out to the mortgage company. But it doesn't stop
Yes.
there. You want to find out about those taxes. Make sure those
Yes.
taxes are paid, because there are situations where people are grieving, they don't know what to do, they put it off some, and the taxes go
Yes.
delinquent. And if those
Yes.
taxes go delinquent, they can go into collections, they can start a foreclosure process, all based
Mm-hmm.
on you defaulting on your mortgage or your taxes. So it's very
Yes.
important when you have property, even if there's no mortgage, to go ahead and make sure those
Right.
taxes stay paid. That gives you
Yes.
time. Then
Yes.
something else
Yes.
that sometimes people don't think about is insurance. So you have a house
Mm-hmm.
now that was owned by a loved one, and they're no longer, no one's living in the house. Well, insurance still needs to be on that house. What if there's a fire? What if there's a
Yes. That's
situation
correct.
that goes on? So you have
Mm-hmm.
to reach out to the insurance company and get vacant home insurance. They will let you
Okay.
know exactly, the type of insurance that you need, because you want to protect that property. You don't want it to
Yes.
be uninsured. Another thing
Yes.
is you want to change the locks, because whoever lived in the
Mm.
house before, you don't know who else has a key. So
Right.
if you're the only one who has a key, that's great. But you never know if that family member had given a key to a friend or someone else. You want to make sure that no one can get in the property without you knowing.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the other thing that sometimes people don't think about too is there's a cost to doing the probate process. It varies based
Mm-hmm.
on your area and it varies based on the property, but there may be a
Mm-hmm.
cost. And I had a family call me up and they said that their mom had passed away. She had left
Mm-hmm.
them the house and they were calling because they didn't have the money for probate. They weren't expecting
Right.
that. And so that is an
Mm-hmm.
expense as well. So, and of course,
Yeah.
they found the money because they needed to do the probate, but that is something to
Right.
think about as well, having the
Yeah.
money for probate.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you mentioned and you went over some of those steps
Mm-hmm.
that people need to do
Mm-hmm.
after someone
Mm-hmm.
passes. But they do need to move. You need to go ahead and at least get through the probate or the legal process to
Mm-hmm.
verify that all the person who passes away, all their desires are done. So you need to get that executor
Yes.
named. You need to go ahead and if there's property involved, go ahead and get that put into the other person's name or however the will expresses to do it. But you don't have to
Mm-hmm.
rush to sell. You don't have to rush
Right.
to do something with the property, but you do need to move pretty quickly to secure the property.
Yes.
Make sure that it's
That's correct.
secured. So locate that will or trust. Have the death certificate that you can take and then go begin the process of going to the circuit court and getting that executor or that administrator named so that when you are
Mm-hmm.
ready to make these bigger decisions, you have everything in order.
Yes.
Secure the property, notify the insurance company so you have proper
Mm-hmm.
insurance on that property, and don't, if you can, keep the utilities minimally active. You don't have to have everything on.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need cable if no one's living there. But think about if
Right.
there's no one living there and you're in the dead of winter, you may want to go ahead and winterize. You don't want the pipes
Yes.
bursting. So certain things you want
Yes.
to think about if you're keeping on the electricity, turn the thermostat down where the pipes aren't going to freeze or the air conditioning isn't always running if it's hot, but it's on so you have access to it. And
Yes.
then make sure you
Yes.
gather whatever financial documents are needed. Many times families can make decisions based on emotion and they don't have all the information because it is an emotional time. You're inheriting a property
Mm-hmm.
most of the time because someone has passed away. So you have to do all of that while having that loved one that you miss. So we just want
Yes.
to pause and make those informed decisions. And if you don't know, ask. Find out what
Right.
you need to do. Don't feel pressed.
Yes.
So,
And
go ahead. Yes.
yeah, I wanted to add. I mean, the blessing is once again knowing someone, and all in who you know. So Khaliyah and I have had a relationship, known each other for a while. So a
Yes.
realtor or someone, with that knowledge is definitely somebody you need to reach out to if you don't have a will. For instance, we didn't have a will. So my mother-in-law didn't have a will. So with that being said, everything was exploratory. So once again, I had to reach out to someone that had the knowledge and had the know-how on to get this process done. Another thing you mentioned was about the um, just the complexity around this property. In a lot of cases, it's a blessing. You're looking at, okay, yes, someone passed, but now we have something. We have another thing, but that's just
Right.
it. It's another thing, meaning it's another mortgage. For our example, we had a mortgage, we had electric, we had insurance, we were paying for two homes at that
Right.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't think about that. And but at the time that in some cases, once again, talking with a realtor or someone like Khaliyah, they can help guide you on what to do because it can get depending on anyone's situation,
Yes.
it can get very expensive. But nevertheless, it all works out very good when you go through the right process and you talk with the right person to help them guide you through that process.
And you're right, because
Hmm.
sometimes the weight of all those additional expenses can make you
Hmm.
rush to do a decision. Like you're paying your
Right.
mortgage, and then all of a sudden now you have
Hmm.
another mortgage to pay, and
Hmm.
another light bill, like you said, and more utilities.
Hmm.
And some people can say, you know what, I just need to sell it. So I'm going to go ahead and
Right.
sell it. And it's
Hmm.
public record when someone passes away, so you will start
Yes.
getting those calls from investors who are there
Hmm.
to help. They will buy that property from you. You don't have to do any work. They will, maybe you'll make a little bit on there, you pay off that mortgage, and now that's gone from you. But
Yes.
sometimes you can think about it a little bit. Maybe this
Hmm.
property could become a rental property.
Right.
So then the renter for that property now is paying up more than the bill
Hmm.
that's owed, and you're making some money on the property, and they're taking care of
Right.
the utilities. Of course, you're taking care of the taxes
Hmm.
and the maintenance,
Hmm.
but now you're making some money and you don't have those two mortgages. And when I talk to
Yes.
people and they come to me and they say, I've lost, my loved
Hmm.
one, and I have this property and I want to sell it, I ask them, I we
Hmm.
all, real estate agents, we are there to help people
Right.
too. Yes, we make money
Yes.
by selling, and if we don't sell a property, then we don't make money, but it's beyond
Hmm.
money. You have to
Yes.
help people understand, because you don't want people to regret a decision that they made. And many times we make
That's
decisions
correct.
based on a situation and we didn't know we had options. We didn't know that
Right.
if we took a little bit of time, we may be able to rent the property. And then we
Hmm.
talk about
Hmm.
that, because there are pros and cons to
Yes.
having renters. You have a great renter, it's
Hmm.
fantastic. They pay it on time.
Right.
They are taking care of your
Hmm.
property like it's their own. It's fantastic. You
Right.
have a renter who is not
Right.
paying their rent. Now you got two mortgages again. Who is in your property
Correct.
damaging it. Now you're going to have to fix another home. So there are pros and
Yes.
cons to both, but you
Yes.
have that
Yes.
option. And then you can
Hmm.
fix up the property. In some cases, what if the property is
Hmm.
like really in bad condition? Well, it may make sense, if it's going to
Hmm.
cost you too much money to renovate, to sell to an investor. But sometimes
Right.
it does make sense to fix it up. And
Right.
even if you
Yes.
don't make a whole lot of money, you would have made more money than if you just sold it for a little bit over what was due. Right? So
Yes.
now you're
Hmm.
making some money off of the property. It's a new home for somebody else, so it's a win-win. You're making money, someone's getting a new home, and you've made a decision that's going to help you as well.
That's correct. And I want to add to, because like you say, there's so many things, during this time, someone's grieving or a family is grieving. There is a lot, it's a lot that when it comes to the business of life, I can
Yes.
remember when my father passed away, my mother, um, unintentionally didn't know that she could receive certain benefits from him, from his military background.
Yes.
And not until maybe 20 plus years later, near 30 years later, we found out that she was um, eligible for a pension that she would have been able to get 30 years prior. So these are things like you say, just having that time to settle in, having the right people there to help guide you when it comes to the business aspect of things. Because another thing that I want to bring up is the real estate taxes.
Yes.
My mother-in-law, where we live in Henrico County, which is in near Richmond, Virginia, Henrico County offers a property tax deferred program for seniors. So you literally don't have to pay your property tax. Well, guess what? Mom's gone. All of a sudden,
Oh.
you get a property tax bill.
Yes. Wow.
When you switch over, now you get a property tax bill. That's depending on the value of the house. It's in the thousands. So
Yes.
these are all things like you say. Being you know looking at it from the aspect of these are new things that you may have to encounter if you lose a loved one and they have property to pass over to you. Now, Khaliyah, can you talk toward the probate? Well, I know we're going to get to it later, but when it comes to I'm sorry, taxes. Like, okay, you sell the home. Let's say you make the decision to sell the home. And I've been told that it, depending on if you inherited versus if it was in a will and or if your name was on the house prior, you avoid having to pay federal capital gains tax. Now, is that something that a lawyer needs to talk about, or is that something that you understand or know? Because that's a pretty serious thing too.
Yes, I appreciate that question. And yeah, I will defer
Mm-hmm.
that one to a
Yeah.
CPA or to a
Yes.
tax attorney to give that
Yes.
proper information. And maybe that's what we need to do for one of our
Yes.
episodes is bring one
Yes.
on and ask these questions because that's a really good
Yes.
question. There are tax
Mm-hmm.
implications to everything. So, what are the
That's
tax
correct.
implications for this inherited property that you sold? That's a really
Yes.
good question. So yeah, we will. Yes,
Yes.
we definitely want to
Okay.
get that question answered, and by a
Yes,
tax
ma'am.
professional. And I recommend that
Mm-hmm.
too. We all have our place and our job and what we do, but you
Mm-hmm.
always go to the specialist. So when it comes to
Yes.
these tax questions, that is a good point. That when you're
Mm-hmm.
deciding if you should sell or if you should rent
Mm-hmm.
or if you should
Mm-hmm.
refinance, talk with a tax consultant to see what are the
Yes.
implications, how is this going to affect
Yes.
us, and if we sell, do
That's
we need to
correct.
hold a portion of this money? Maybe
Right.
they are, if we held it for a little bit longer, could we save money on our
Mm-hmm.
taxes? These are
That's
all the
correct.
questions you want to ask because we
Mm-hmm.
don't know.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah,
That's right.
and we're talking, when you're going through this process and you have lost
Mm-hmm.
someone and now you have a mortgage. Sometimes there's only one heir, and so it makes for
Mm-hmm.
maybe an
Mm-hmm.
easier process in terms of
Right.
making decisions. But sometimes there are
Yes.
multiple family members. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
multiple family
Mm-hmm.
members and family members of family members and people you haven't spoken to in years or maybe not even
Yes.
ever spoken to. And now this
Yes.
property is there. Who does what? So this is
That's
when
correct.
I want to stress that you definitely, before you make any decisions, you want to go through the legal process, whether it's probate
Mm-hmm.
or getting an administrator. So the person who's the executor of it is determined. And then you want to have a
Yes.
meeting of the minds because it will make it so
Mm.
much easier if everyone is on the same page. Someone may want
Yes.
to, if there's a house, someone may want to sell, someone may want to keep it. It's much better if everybody can talk together and be on the same page. I have a client who reached out to me to sell some land,
Mm-hmm.
and he
Mm-hmm.
wanted to sell. The mom passed away. He wanted to sell the land. Him and his family are estranged. So when we reached out
Mm-hmm.
to the brother, they don't want to sell. They're not even talking. So now if they
Right.
don't come to some agreement, it's a benefit though the taxes are being paid. But if they don't come to
Yes.
some agreement, that land sits there. No one
That's
can do
correct.
anything with it because they both inherited that property. So,
That's correct.
it's important to have a meeting of the minds, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not always easy. It's sad, but it's
Yes.
not. But at those times we have
Right.
to deal with it. Sometimes you have to get a mediator involved. But one thing I will
Yes.
say, while you are waiting, whether it's an estranged family member or everyone's getting along, make sure you're paying the taxes. Make sure you're paying
Yes.
the mortgage or you've made an arrangement with that mortgage company, because if you
Yes.
haven't, they can come after that property. And you
That's
can
correct.
lose the property. Then they will auction off the property if you lose it, and you get whatever
Mm.
whatever they get from the auction. And if it doesn't pay off
Mm.
everything, you may owe money. So you don't want to leave an
Yes.
investment out there like that. Now, we talked about if you wanted to sell, you could rent. Some of the other things you could do too, I think we said you could refinance. If there's a mortgage, you could
Mm-hmm.
refinance and assume the
Mm-hmm.
mortgage. You could live in it.
Yes.
You know, if you could sell the
Right.
home that you're in if you want and live in that property. So if
Mm-hmm.
you sell the
Mm-hmm.
property, you're going to pay off the debts. The inheritance is going to get distributed with whoever are heirs to that property. And this is saying everything legal has already been done. You can't sell a property until it's legally done. So you can't just say,
Yes.
oh, my so and so has left me this property. Now I'm going to do all these things. You can't do that until you go through the circuit court. So make sure you go through that part too. You can also, if you
Yes.
have heirs to the property, and maybe you want to keep and they want to sell, you can buy out the heirs. So
Yes.
everybody
Yes.
has their portion. You can buy them out. Or there's a partition sale if disputes arise, which I would recommend you talk to an attorney about that as well. If you're going to even just
Mm-hmm.
sell your part of the land. I was in a transaction one time, and everybody couldn't agree, which was what we ended up in the end. It had a joyful ending, but throughout the process,
Mm-hmm.
it was very stressful, I would say, for the family members involved, because there was a lot of people not talking to each other, a lot of hurt feelings and
Yes.
everything in there. But at one
Mm-hmm.
point,
Mm-hmm.
they had talked about just selling their portion. They owned one third. They didn't really want to be involved in it anymore, so they could sell the part that they own, and then this new person would be in joint ownership with the other heirs. That's an option
Yes.
too. But all of these
Mm-hmm.
take you to think about, to really
Yes.
make calculated, informed decisions.
Yes. And I would like to add, I have a relative that is going through the same thing you're talking about. His father passed, and the heirs were left to his wife and his sibling, and they're both in their 90s. And I would say everyone that's at the table is probably between 15 and 20 different people.
Wow.
And it's a plot of land that's about 20 acres.
Yes.
And it's like anything. They have a realtor that's trying to get them to sell it, and then the other side is saying we don't want to sell it, and it's a pretty big situation, And
Yes.
to your point, that same example is actually going on right now with one of my relatives.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that is something to really think about. Hmm.
Yes, and it's happening all over. There are a lot of people going through this situation, and it helps to know what their rights are. What options do they have? How can we get
Right.
to something that works for everyone? So as we're
Yeah.
wrapping up, we got about just
Hmm.
a couple minutes left. I want
Okay. Yes.
to we want to encourage the listeners to have a will, have a trust,
Mm.
have something where your desires are mapped out. That will make it a lot easier if a family member is going to inherit your property. And there are different laws in different states, so you want to find out what constitutes an effective will in your area. But you definitely want to think about that. Discuss
Mm.
what you want. I mean, you know, death is a part of life. So the best way to approach it is planned. So discuss what
Mm-hmm.
you want to do openly. Have your documents organized so that they're easy to find. Educate the heirs, your family members, on your desires so they know, and clearly name the executors in your documents. So there's no fight on that day. I'm going to do it, you're going to do it. Let clearly name who those people are, and plan for
Yeah.
taxes and insurance. These things will help the
Mm-hmm.
ones who are here when you leave to know what to do and to best
Yeah.
honor what you have. So, if you inherit a property and you don't know everything, seek those answers. It doesn't hurt to ask. Every question is a good question. So we're going to close out today. If today's conversation sparked questions for you, or you have a story to share that may help someone else, we invite you to connect with us. Visit bearsheetcorporation.org. Email us at info@bearsheetcorporation.org, or call 844-405-3924. Thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you, Hezekiah, for joining us again this week. This is
Thank
Bear
you.
Sheet, Building Stability, Preserving Legacy, and Strengthening Communities. Join us next time as we continue these conversations that help families move forward with clarity, confidence, and dignity.